The stagecoach door opened, and Caroline Vance tumbled out onto the dusty street of Denver, Colorado, her legs barely holding her upright after 3 weeks of bone-rattling travel from Boston in the summer of 1876. She had never felt so exhausted, so filthy, or so utterly alone in all her 22 years of life. The letter from her uncle's lawyer crinkled in her reticule, informing her that Uncle Thomas had passed and left her his mercantile store. But when she asked directions from a weathered shopkeeper, the man simply shook his head and told her the store had burned down 2 months prior. Caroline stood in the middle of the street, her gray traveling dress covered in dust, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins, and felt the weight of her choices crushing down on her shoulders. She had sold everything she owned in Boston, had turned down a perfectly respectable marriage proposal from Mr. Henderson, and had traveled across the entire country based on a letter that was apparently outdated before she had even received it. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her corset. "You look lost, miss," a woman's voice said from behind her. Caroline turned to see an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair wearing a simple calico dress. "I am Mrs. Patterson. My husband runs the hotel. Are you needing a room?" "I suppose I do now," Caroline said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. She explained her situation while Mrs. Patterson listened with sympathetic clicks of her tongue. "That mercantile burned something fierce," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "Your uncle, God rest his soul, had already passed by then. The lawyer should have written you sooner, but I suppose mail being what it is." She trailed off, then brightened slightly. "But there is still the cabin." "Cabin?" "Your uncle had a cabin up in the mountains about 15 miles north of here. Small place, but sturdy. He would go up there when the store got to be too much for him. It should be yours now, legally speaking." Caroline's heart lifted slightly. At least she would have a roof over her head. "How do I get there?" Mrs. Patterson's expression grew concerned. "That is the trouble. You would need to ride, and the trail is not easy. Can you ride a horse?" "No," Caroline admitted. "I have never even been near one, really. We took carriages in Boston." "Well then, Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, "you would need someone to take you up there and someone to teach you how to manage on your own. The cabin is remote. You cannot walk to town every time you need something." That evening, sitting in the small hotel dining room with a bowl of stew she could barely afford, Caroline overheard 2 men talking at the next table. "Sterling Cross came down from his trap lines today," one of them said. "First time in near about 2 months. Sold a whole pack of pelts." "That mountain man barely comes to civilization anymore," the other replied. "Lives up there like some kind of wild animal himself. But I will say this, he is fair in his dealings. Never cheats a man, and his furs are always prime quality. Heard he is leaving again tomorrow at first light. Probably will not see him again until autumn." Caroline's hand stilled on her spoon. A mountain man. Someone who knew the mountains, who could survive up there. She did not have much money left, but perhaps she could offer him something for his help. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stood and walked to their table. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said, and both men looked up in surprise. "I could not help but overhear. This Sterling Cross, where might I find him?" The older of the 2 men, who had a gray beard and suspicious eyes, looked her up and down. What business would a city lady have with someone like Sterling Cross? "I need to get to my uncle's cabin in the mountains, and I need someone to teach me to ride a horse," Caroline said directly. "I can pay," the younger man chuckled. "Sterling is not exactly the teaching type, miss. He barely speaks more than 5 words when he comes to town. Nevertheless, I would like to ask him myself. Where can I find him?" The older man shrugged. "Try the trading post." "If he is still in town," That is where he will be. The trading post was a rough wooden building that smelled of leather, tobacco, and animal pelts. Caroline stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Several men stood around a counter where a bald man with massive forearms was counting out coins. But Caroline's attention went immediately to the man standing with his back to her, his hands resting on the counter. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out half the room. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, slightly wavy and looking like it had been trimmed with a hunting knife. He wore buckskin pants and a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms roped with muscle and tanned dark from the sun. A knife hung at his belt, and she could see the stock of a rifle leaning against the counter near his hand. "That is all I can give you for this lot, Sterling," the proprietor said. "Take it or leave it." "I will take it." His voice was deep and rough, like stones rolling in a creek bed. He scooped up the coins and turned, and Caroline found herself looking up into the most striking face she had ever seen. Strong jaw covered with dark stubble, high cheekbones, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale blue-gray and intense. He looked to be perhaps 28 or 30 years old, and there was something almost dangerous about him, something wild and untamed. Their eyes met, and for a moment Sterling simply stared at her as if she were a strange creature that had wandered into his territory. Then he moved to step around her, clearly intending to leave. "Wait," Caroline said quickly. "Are you Sterling Cross?" He stopped, those pale eyes focusing on her again. "I am. My name is Caroline Vance. I need your help. Not interested." He took another step toward the door. "I can pay you," Caroline said desperately. "I need someone to take me to my uncle's cabin in the mountains, and I need someone to teach me how to ride a horse." Sterling paused again, looking back at her. "Who was your uncle?" "Thomas Vance. He had a mercantile here, but it burned. He left me a cabin north of here, about 15 miles into the mountains." Something flickered in Sterling's expression. "I knew Tom Vance. He was a decent man." He studied her for a long moment, and Caroline felt like those pale eyes were seeing right through her, cataloging every weakness and fear. "You do not belong in the mountains." "Nevertheless, I have nowhere else to go," Caroline said, lifting her chin. "I have come all the way from Boston, and I have no money to go back. The cabin is mine, and I intend to live there, with your help or without it." "Without it, you will be dead within a week," Sterling said bluntly. "Maybe less." "Then help me not die," Caroline said. "Please." Sterling's jaw tightened. He looked away, out the window at the darkening sky, and Caroline could practically see him weighing the request. Finally, he looked back at her. "I will take you to the cabin," he said, "and I will teach you the basics of riding and mountain survival. But I will not nursemaid you. You learn fast or you do not learn at all." "Understood." Relief flooded through Caroline. "Understood, thank you. How much do you want?" "We will discuss payment later," Sterling said. "Meet me at the livery stable at dawn. Bring only what you can carry in a single pack. Nothing fancy, nothing useless. Understand?" "Yes. And wear practical clothes. You cannot ride in that." He gestured at her dress with something that might have been disdain. "I will find something suitable," Caroline said, though she had no idea where. Sterling gave a curt nod and walked out into the evening, leaving Caroline standing in the trading post with her heart pounding. She had done it. She had found someone to help her. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a blessing that evening, helping Caroline trade her fancy Boston dresses for practical wool skirts and cotton blouses that the hotel owner kept in a trunk for emergencies. They also found a pair of worn leather boots that fit reasonably well and a canvas pack that would hold her meager belongings. Sterling Cross is a good man. Mrs. Patterson said as she helped Caroline pack. "But he is not easy. Lost his whole family to fever about 10 years back. Was married, had a little daughter. After they died, he went up into the mountains and barely comes down anymore, just keeps to himself up there." Caroline felt a pang of sympathy. "That is terrible." "It is. But he knows those mountains better than anyone alive, and if he says he will help you, he will. Sterling's word is iron." Mrs. Patterson folded a wool blanket into the pack. "Just do not expect warmth from him. That part of him died with his family." That night Caroline barely slept. She kept thinking about the mountain man with the sad eyes, about the cabin waiting for her in the mountains, about the fact that tomorrow she would sit on a horse for the first time in her life. She had always been sensible, always done what was expected of her, but this felt like stepping off the edge of the world into empty air. Dawn came too quickly. Caroline dressed in her new practical clothes, braided her hair tightly, and shouldered her pack. She met Mrs. Patterson in the lobby, and the older woman pressed a packet of food into her hands. "For the journey," Mrs. Patterson said. "And Caroline, be careful. The mountains are beautiful, but they are not forgiving." Caroline walked through the quiet streets of Denver as the sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. The livery stable was on the edge of town, a long, low building that smelled of hay and horses. Sterling was already there, standing beside 3 horses. One was a massive bay gelding that looked as powerful as its owner. Another was a smaller chestnut mare with gentle eyes, and the third was a pack horse loaded with supplies. Sterling looked up as Caroline approached, his eyes taking in her new outfit with a brief nod of approval. He wore the same buckskin pants as yesterday, but had added a leather vest, and his rifle was strapped to his saddle. "That is better," he said. "This is Copper." He gestured to the chestnut mare. "She is patient and steady, a good horse for learning." Caroline approached the mare cautiously. Up close, the horse seemed enormous, all muscle and power, and she could feel her heart racing. "First lesson," Sterling said, coming to stand beside her. "Horses sense fear. If you are nervous, she will be nervous. Breathe slow and steady. Let her smell your hand." Caroline extended her hand, trying to keep it from shaking. The mare's nose was soft as velvet as she sniffed Caroline's fingers, and despite her fear, Caroline felt a smile tug at her lips. "Good," Sterling said. "Now mounting. Put your left foot in the stirrup. Grab the saddle horn with both hands and pull yourself up while swinging your right leg over. I will help you the first time." Before Caroline could protest, Sterling's hands were on her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. She got her foot in the stirrup and hauled herself up, swinging her leg over the saddle. Suddenly, she was sitting on top of the horse, much higher off the ground than she had expected, and she grabbed the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands. "Relax," Sterling said, looking up at her. "If you grip the saddle like that, you will be sore within an hour. Sit deep in the saddle, keep your back straight, and move with the horse, not against her." He swung up onto his own horse with a fluid grace that made it look effortless, and Caroline felt a surge of envy. He gathered the pack horse's lead rope and looked at her. "We will walk for the first few hours so you can get used to the motion. Keep your heels down and your hands steady on the reins. Do not pull on her mouth, just light pressure to turn or stop. Understand?" "I think so," Caroline said uncertainly. "You will learn. Let us go." Sterling clicked his tongue and his bay horse started walking. Copper followed automatically, and Caroline felt the rolling motion of the horse's walk beneath her. It was strange and somewhat unsettling, but not as terrifying as she had feared. They left Denver behind as the sun climbed higher, following a trail that led north into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The landscape was stunning, all golden grassland giving way to pine forests, with the massive peaks rising in the distance like sentinels guarding some ancient secret. The air smelled of sage and pine, so different from the coal smoke and sea salt of Boston. For the first hour, Sterling said nothing, just rode ahead of her with the easy posture of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. Caroline focused on staying balanced, on moving with Copper's steady rhythm, on not falling off. Her thighs were already beginning to ache from gripping the saddle. "Relax your legs," Sterling called back without turning around. "You are trying too hard." "I am trying not to fall off," Caroline called back. "If you tense up, you will fall off. Trust the horse. She knows what she is doing even if you do not." Caroline tried to relax, tried to breathe the way Sterling had told her to. Gradually, she found herself settling into Copper's rhythm, feeling the horse's movement and adjusting to it rather than fighting it. It was almost meditative in a way, this focus on balance and motion. They stopped at midday beside a creek where the horses could drink. Sterling dismounted and then came to help Caroline down. When her feet hit the ground, her legs nearly buckled, and Sterling's hand shot out to steady her. "Normal for the first day," he said. "Walk around a bit. Get the blood moving." Caroline wobbled around like a newborn foal while Sterling unpacked some food from his saddlebags. He handed her some jerky and hardtack, and they sat on opposite sides of a fallen log to eat. The silence stretched between them, not exactly uncomfortable but not friendly either. "How much further to the cabin?" Caroline asked finally. "We will reach it by evening if we keep a steady pace," Sterling said. "It is a good cabin. Tom built it well, but it has been empty for months. There will be work to do." "I am not afraid of work." Sterling's pale eyes studied her. "Why did you really come out here? A woman like you from Boston. You could have stayed there, married some merchant or banker, lived a comfortable life." "I had that option," Caroline admitted. "But I did not want it. I wanted something more than parlors and tea parties and pretending to care about the latest fashions. I wanted something real." "The mountains are real," Sterling said. "Real danger, real hardship, real death if you are careless. This is not some romantic adventure story." "I did not say I thought it was," Caroline replied, feeling a spark of irritation. "I know it will be difficult, but I would rather face real challenges than waste away in a life that feels like slow suffocation." Something shifted in Sterling's expression, just for a moment. "Maybe it was respect or maybe just surprise. You might have more spine than I gave you credit for," he said. "But spine only gets you so far up here. You need skills, knowledge, and luck." "Then teach me," Caroline said. "That is what I am asking you to do." Sterling stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "Mount up. We have more ground to cover." The afternoon ride was harder than the morning. Caroline's body was discovering muscles she did not know she had, and each one was protesting vigorously. But she gritted her teeth and kept riding, refusing to complain. Sterling seemed to approve of her silence, though he said nothing directly. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape changed. The air grew cooler and thinner, the pine trees grew thicker, and the trail became rockier. Sterling navigated it all with barely a glance, his big bay horse picking its way over obstacles with calm confidence. Copper followed faithfully, and Caroline learned to trust the mare's judgment about where to place her hooves. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western peaks when they emerged into a small meadow. On the far side, nestled against a stand of pine trees, was a log cabin. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A shed stood nearby, probably for storage or animals. "This is it," Sterling said. "Your new home." Caroline stared at the cabin, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It was beautiful in its simplicity, so different from the ornate townhouses of Boston. It was also completely isolated. She could not see another building in any direction, just mountains and trees and sky. Sterling dismounted and helped Caroline down. Her legs were so stiff she could barely walk, but she followed him to the cabin door. He pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The interior was dim and dusty, but Caroline could see the bones of a good home. There was a fireplace with a cooking area, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a bed frame in one corner and shelves along the walls. A ladder led to a small loft. Everything was covered in a layer of dust and mouse droppings, but it was fundamentally sound. "It will need cleaning," Sterling said, stating the obvious. "But the roof is good, the chimney draws well, and the walls are tight. You will be warm enough when winter comes." "Winter," Caroline repeated, not having thought that far ahead. "You have about 3 months to prepare," Sterling said. "You will need firewood, lots of it, food stores, warmer clothes. If you are serious about living here, you need to start thinking about survival, not comfort." Caroline looked around the cabin, feeling the weight of what she had taken on settling over her. "Will you help me prepare?" Sterling was quiet for a long moment. "I will teach you what you need to know, but then I go back to my own place. I am not looking for company, Miss Vance." "I understand," Caroline said, "and you can call me Caroline." "I will call you what is proper," Sterling said. "We should get the horses settled and start a fire. It will be dark soon." They worked together as the light faded, Sterling showing Caroline how to unsaddle Copper and brush her down, how to check the mare's hooves for stones, how to make sure she had water and a pile of the grass that grew in the meadow. The shed had a small corral attached, and they put all 3 horses in there for the night. Then Sterling started a fire in the cabin's fireplace while Caroline swept out the worst of the dust. He had brought basic supplies, and soon he had coffee brewing and beans heating. They ate sitting at the dusty table, and Caroline had never tasted anything so good. The hard labor and mountain air had given her an appetite she had not felt in years. "Tomorrow we start properly," Sterling said. "I will show you the area where the spring is, what plants you can eat and which ones will kill you. Then we start your riding lessons in earnest. If you are going to live up here, you need to be able to ride to town and back on your own." "How often will I need to go to town?" Caroline asked. "Depends. In summer, maybe once every few weeks for supplies you cannot make or grow yourself. In winter, you might not go at all for months. The trail gets dangerous when the snow is deep." The thought of being completely alone for months was daunting, but Caroline pushed the fear aside. She had made her choice. That night, Sterling insisted on sleeping outside under the porch overhang, giving Caroline the cabin's bed. She protested, but he silenced her with a look. "I have slept on harder ground than that porch," he said, "and it is not proper for us to share a cabin at night." People talk. Caroline lay in the bed, wrapped in her blanket, listening to the absolute silence of the mountains. No carriages, no voices, no city sounds at all. Just the whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant call of an owl. She had never heard such quiet, and it was both peaceful and unsettling. The next day began before dawn. Caroline woke to the smell of coffee and emerged to find Sterling already up, a fire going in the fireplace. He handed her a cup without a word, and they drank in silence as the sky slowly brightened. "Today you learn the land," Sterling said. "Get your boots on." They spent the morning walking around the area, Sterling pointing out landmarks and resources. He showed her the spring that bubbled up about 100 yards from the cabin, clear and cold and reliable. He showed her which berries were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He pointed out tracks in the soft earth near the creek, teaching her to recognize deer, elk, bear, and mountain lion. "If you see a fresh bear track, you go the other way," Sterling said. "Do not try to be brave. A bear will kill you without a second thought if it feels threatened or if it is a mother with cubs. What about mountain lions? They usually avoid humans, but they hunt at dawn and dusk. If you have to go out at those times, make noise. They like to ambush silent prey. Caroline absorbed it all, trying to memorize every detail. Sterling was a patient teacher, she realized, even if his manner was gruff. He repeated important information without irritation, and made sure she understood before moving on. In the afternoon, they returned to riding lessons. Sterling had Caroline mount and dismount Copper over and over until she could do it smoothly. Then he taught her how to make the horse walk, turn, and stop using leg pressure and rein cues. Horses respond to confidence, Sterling said. If you are wishy-washy with your commands, she will ignore you. Be clear about what you want. Caroline practiced walking Copper in circles around the meadow while Sterling watched from the center. It was harder than it looked to coordinate her hands and legs, to sit properly and give clear signals at the same time. But gradually, she started to get the feel of it, started to understand the conversation between rider and horse. Better, Sterling said after an hour. Tomorrow we will try trotting. That evening, Sterling caught some trout from the creek and showed Caroline how to clean and cook them. As they ate, Caroline found herself watching him across the fire. There was something compelling about the way he moved, economical and precise, no wasted motion. Everything he did had purpose. And despite his rough manner, there was kindness in his actions, in the patient way he taught her, in the way he made sure she was fed and safe. "Why did you agree to help me?" Caroline asked suddenly. Sterling looked up from his plate, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "Told you. I knew your uncle. He was a good man. But that cannot be the only reason." Sterling was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he chewed a piece of fish. "Maybe I saw someone who needed help," he finally said. "And maybe I remembered what it is like to be alone and scared, even if you are trying not to show it." The honesty in his words caught Caroline off guard. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know you would rather be alone." "Yes," Sterling agreed. "But sometimes what we want and what we should do are different things." They fell into a routine over the next 2 weeks. Every morning they would ride together at dawn, Sterling teaching Caroline to handle Copper with increasing skill. She learned to trot, then to canter, learned to read the trail ahead and trust her horse's instincts. Her body adapted to the demands of riding, the constant soreness fading into strength in the afternoons. Sterling taught her other skills: how to split firewood without injuring herself, how to identify and gather edible plants, how to smoke meat for preservation, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals. Every lesson was practical, focused on survival, but Caroline found herself treasuring these teaching moments for another reason entirely. She was falling in love with Sterling Cross. It happened gradually, then all at once. She loved the way his rare smiles transformed his stern face. She loved his steady competence, the way his strong hands could gentle a nervous horse or mend a broken fence rail with equal skill. She loved the sound of his deep voice in the early morning quiet, explaining some piece of mountain lore. She loved the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, something almost like longing in those pale eyes before he shuttered it away. But Sterling kept a careful distance between them, always proper, always controlled. He never touched her except when necessary for teaching, never stayed after dark, never gave any sign that he felt anything beyond a sense of duty toward her. One morning, 3 weeks into her time at the cabin, Caroline woke to find frost on the ground. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Sterling already waiting with the horses saddled. "Today we ride to town," he said. "You need supplies before the weather turns, and you need to prove you can make the ride on your own." Caroline felt a flutter of nervousness. 15 miles each way was a long ride, and the trail was not easy. But she nodded and mounted Copper with the confidence of growing skill. They rode together through the crisp morning, their breath misting in the cold air. The aspens were beginning to turn gold, and the mountains were breathtakingly beautiful in the autumn light. Caroline felt something almost like happiness, riding beside Sterling through this wild landscape, and she wished the ride could last forever. They reached Denver by midday, and Sterling took her to the general store where she bought flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and other staples she would need. The storekeeper gave her an appraising look when he saw her with Sterling. "So you are Tom Vance's niece," he said. "Heard you were living up at his cabin. That is a hard life for a woman alone." "I am managing," Caroline said. "Sterling has been teaching her," the storekeeper said, his tone implying something more than just lessons. "Mr. Cross has been very helpful," Caroline said firmly. "I could not have learned the mountains without him." Sterling said nothing, just loaded her purchases onto the packhorse with an expressionless face. But Caroline saw the tension in his shoulders and wondered what he was thinking. They ate a quick meal at the hotel, where Mrs. Patterson fussed over Caroline and declared she looked healthier than when she had arrived. "Mountain air agrees with you," Mrs. Patterson said. "You have color in your cheeks and strength in your arms. Tom would be proud to see you taking to his cabin so well." On the ride back, Sterling was quieter than usual. The sun was setting as they climbed back into the mountains, painting the sky brilliant orange and pink. They stopped to rest the horses at a viewpoint overlooking a vast valley, and Caroline stood beside Copper, watching the light fade. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "I never imagined anything like this existed when I was in Boston." Sterling stood a few feet away, his big frame silhouetted against the dying light. "It is beautiful," he agreed, "and unforgiving. Do not ever forget that." "I will not," Caroline said. She hesitated, then added, "Sterling, can I ask you something personal?" She saw his shoulders tense. "I suppose." "Mrs. Patterson told me you lost your family. I am sorry. That must have been terrible." Sterling was silent for so long Caroline thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "It was 10 years ago. Fever swept through our homestead. My wife Sarah and my daughter Emma were gone within 3 days. Nothing I could do, just had to watch them slip away." Caroline's heart ached at the pain in his words. "That is why you went to the mountains." "Could not stay where everything reminded me of them. Could not stand the pity in people's eyes. Up in the mountains there is just survival, simple, clean, no room for grief." "But you cannot outrun grief," Caroline said gently. "You can only learn to live with it." Sterling turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were full of something raw and wounded. "Is that what you think I am doing? Running?" "I think you are protecting yourself," Caroline said, "which is understandable. But Sterling, you are alive. They would not want you to bury yourself in these mountains forever." "You do not know what they would want," Sterling said, his voice suddenly harsh. "You did not know them." "You are right, I did not," Caroline said, "but I know you. I have watched you these past weeks, and I have seen your kindness, your patience, your strength. Those are not the qualities of a man who should be alone." "We should ride," Sterling said abruptly, turning away. "It will be full dark soon." They rode the rest of the way in tense silence. When they reached the cabin, Sterling helped Caroline unload the supplies, his movements stiff and formal. Then he turned to leave. "Sterling, wait," Caroline said. "I am sorry if I overstepped. I did not mean to cause you pain." He paused, his back to her. "You did not," he said quietly. "You just made me remember things I have been trying to forget. Good night, Miss Vance." He rode away into the darkness, leaving Caroline standing alone in front of her cabin, feeling like she had just broken something fragile and important. For the next 3 days, Sterling did not come. Caroline tried to tell herself it was fine, that she had learned enough to manage on her own. She rode Copper each morning as the sun rose, gaining confidence in the saddle. She chopped firewood and hauled water and made repairs to the cabin. She was managing, but she missed him. She missed his quiet presence, his deep voice, the way he looked at the mountains like they were old friends. She missed the feeling of safety she had when he was near, missed the small moments of connection they had shared. She had driven him away with her presumptuous words, and the regret sat heavy in her chest. On the 4th morning, Caroline was carrying water from the spring when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A deep, huffing grunt from the trees near the cabin. She froze, remembering Sterling's lessons. Bear. The bucket slipped from her nerveless fingers, water splashing across her boots. The bear emerged from the trees, a massive brown shape that looked twice as large as any animal Caroline had ever seen. It was perhaps 30 yards away, its head swinging back and forth as it tested the air. Caroline's mind raced through everything Sterling had taught her. Do not run. Make yourself large. Make noise. But her throat was closed with fear, and she could not make a sound. The bear took a step toward her, then another. Caroline forced herself to raise her arms to find her voice. "Go away," she croaked. "Go." The bear paused, considering. Then a shot rang out, the sound echoing off the mountains. The bear startled and turned, lumbering back into the trees. Caroline's legs gave out and she sank to the ground, shaking. Sterling came riding out of the trees on his bay horse, his rifle in his hands. He dismounted before his horse had even stopped moving and was beside Caroline in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her shoulders, turning her to face him, his eyes searching her for injury. "No," Caroline managed. "Just scared." Sterling pulled her against his chest, his strong arms wrapping around her, and Caroline felt the wild trembling of his heart beneath her cheek. "I heard the bear," he said, his voice rough. "I was coming back to check on you and I heard it. Jesus, Caroline, if I had been a minute later." "But you were not," Caroline said, her hands fisting in his shirt. "You were here." They stood like that for a long moment, clinging to each other, the fear gradually ebbing away. Then Sterling seemed to realize what he was doing and started to pull back, but Caroline held on. "Do not," she said. "Please do not pull away from me again." "Caroline." Sterling's voice was pained. "I know you are afraid," Caroline said, looking up at him. "I know you have lost everything once and you do not want to risk it again. But Sterling, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since that first day in the trading post, and I think maybe you feel something for me too." Sterling's jaw tightened and she could see the war in his eyes. "I cannot," he said. "I cannot go through that again, losing someone I love. It would kill me this time." "Then you are already halfway in love with me," Caroline said softly. "Because you cannot lose what you do not already care about." Sterling made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. And you are the most stubborn man. We are well matched." Sterling looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he were afraid she might break. But when Caroline kissed him back, rising on her toes and sliding her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened. It was like nothing Caroline had ever experienced, full of promise and passion, and something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sterling rested his forehead against hers. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Absolutely terrified." "So am I," Caroline said, "but I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." Sterling's arms tightened around her. I do not deserve you. That is not for you to decide, Caroline said. Now, are you going to keep coming here every dawn to ride with me, or are you going to make me ride all the way to your place to see you? A smile tugged at Sterling's lips, the first real smile Caroline had ever seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and almost carefree. I will come here, he said, every dawn, for as long as you want me. Forever then, Caroline said. I want you forever. Forever, Sterling echoed and kissed her again. The days that followed were the happiest Caroline had ever known. Sterling came each morning as the sun rose, and they rode together through the mountains, exploring trails and valleys she had never seen. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her with his arms around her as he showed her how to sight and breathe and squeeze the trigger. He taught her to fish, to track deer, to read the signs of changing weather. But more than that, he began to open up to her. As they sat by the fire in the evenings, Sterling told her stories about his life. About growing up in Missouri, learning to trap from his father, coming west to make his fortune. About meeting Sarah at a church social, about their wedding under an oak tree, about Emma's birth and her first words and her laugh that sounded like bells. She was 3 years old, Sterling said one night, staring into the fire, just starting to talk in full sentences. She called me Papa, and it was the best sound in the world. Caroline took his hand, threading her fingers through his. Tell me about Sarah. She was small like you, Sterling said. Dark hair, quick to laugh. She was not afraid of anything. Came west with me even though her family thought she was crazy. She made our homestead into a home, planted flowers around the door, sang while she worked. His voice caught. I thought I would have a lifetime with them. Thought I would watch Emma grow up, have more children, grow old with Sarah. Then the fever came and took it all away. I am so sorry, Caroline whispered. Sterling looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. For 10 years I have been angry. Angry at God for taking them. Angry at myself for not being able to save them. Angry at the world for continuing when they were gone. And then you showed up, this stubborn city woman who had no business being in the mountains, and suddenly I could not stay angry anymore. Why not? Because you made me want to live again, Sterling said simply. Made me want to hope, and that scared me more than any bear or blizzard. Caroline cupped his face with her hand, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. You are allowed to be happy, Sterling. You are allowed to love again. It does not mean you have forgotten them. I know, Sterling said. I am starting to know that now. As autumn deepened, Sterling helped Caroline prepare for winter. They cut and stacked firewood until there were cords of it under the shed's overhang. They smoked venison and fish, dried berries and roots, stored away enough supplies to last until spring. Sterling brought furs from his own cabin, heavy bearskins and soft deer hides that would keep Caroline warm when the temperature dropped below freezing. What about you? Caroline asked as they worked on yet another load of firewood. What will you do when winter comes? Sterling split a log with one powerful swing of his axe. Same as always. Trap my lines, stay alive, wait for spring. Alone in your cabin. That is how I have done it for 10 years. Caroline set down the wood she was carrying and walked over to him. Or you could stay here, with me. Sterling lowered the axe, his eyes searching her face. Caroline, are you asking what I think you are asking? I am saying I do not want to spend the winter wondering if you are safe, if you are warm, if you are alone. I am saying I want you here with me. She took a breath. I am saying I want you to marry me. Sterling stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Usually the man does the asking. I told you I am not a usual woman. No, Sterling agreed. You are extraordinary. He set down the axe and closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his large, calloused hands. "Caroline Vance, I love you. I think I started loving you that first day when you stood in the trading post and demanded I help you, even though you were terrified. And yes, I will marry you. I will be honored to be your husband." Caroline felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Really, really." Sterling kissed her, deep and thorough, and Caroline felt warmth spreading through her entire body. "We will have to ride to Denver for a preacher, and soon before the weather turns." They rode to Denver 2 days later, the autumn air crisp and the aspens blazing gold. Mrs. Patterson was delighted by the news and immediately set about organizing a simple wedding at the small church on the edge of town. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, was an old man who had known Tom Vance and was happy to marry his niece to the mountain man everyone respected. The wedding was held on a bright October afternoon in 1876, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband as witnesses. Caroline wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had made over, and Sterling wore clean buckskins and a new linen shirt. He had trimmed his hair and shaved, though Caroline had made him promise not to shave too much, because she liked the rough stubble. As they stood before Reverend Matthews and exchanged vows, Caroline looked at Sterling's face and saw something she had never seen before: peace. The haunted look that had lived in his pale eyes was gone, replaced by love and hope and contentment. "I, Sterling Cross, take you, Caroline Vance, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Sterling said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life, in sickness and in health, in plenty and in want, until death parts us. I, Caroline Vance, take you, Sterling Cross, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Caroline said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life, in joy and in sorrow, in the mountains and in the valleys, until death parts us. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said with a smile. "Sterling, you may kiss your bride." Sterling pulled Caroline into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made Mrs. Patterson laugh and clap her hands. When they broke apart, both grinning, the small congregation erupted in applause. They stayed in town that night, at the hotel where Caroline had first arrived all those weeks ago. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a small feast, and they ate and drank and celebrated until late in the evening. Then Sterling and Caroline retired to their room, and for the first time, they were truly alone as husband and wife. Sterling closed the door and leaned against it, looking at Caroline with an expression that made her heart race. "Hello, Mrs. Cross." "Hello, Mr. Cross," Caroline said, suddenly feeling nervous. She had never been with a man before, and despite her boldness in proposing, she was not entirely sure what to do now. Sterling seemed to sense her nerves because he crossed to her slowly, giving her time to adjust. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said softly. "We have the rest of our lives." "I want to," Caroline said. "I am just a little nervous." "So am I," Sterling admitted, and Caroline looked at him in surprise. "You are." "It has been 10 years since I was with anyone," Sterling said. "And I love you so much it terrifies me. I want everything to be perfect for you." Caroline reached up and touched his face, running her thumb over his cheekbone. "It will be perfect because it is you and me." Sterling kissed her then, slow and deep, and gradually Caroline's nervousness melted away. He was so gentle with her, his strong hands careful and reverent as they explored. He took his time, learning what made her sigh, what made her gasp, what made her cling to him with desperate need. And when they finally came together, It was with a tenderness that brought tears to Caroline's eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, Sterling's arms around Caroline, her head on his broad chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt utterly safe and cherished. "I love you," Sterling murmured into her hair. "More than I thought I could ever love anyone again." "I love you too," Caroline said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for being stubborn enough not to give up on me," Sterling replied. They returned to the cabin the next day, riding side by side through the mountains as husband and wife. The cabin felt different now, warmer and more welcoming, because it was truly home. Sterling moved his belongings from his cabin over the next few days, and they settled into married life. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in late October. But Caroline was not afraid. She and Sterling had prepared well, and more than that, she had him beside her. They spent the long winter evenings by the fire, Sterling carving or mending his traps while Caroline worked on sewing or read from the few books she had brought from Boston. Sometimes Sterling would play a battered harmonica he had owned since childhood, filling the cabin with simple, haunting melodies. And every dawn, no matter how cold or how much snow had fallen during the night, they rode together. Sterling had built a lean-to shelter for the horses near the cabin, and Copper and Sterling's bay, whom he had named Thunder, were warm and content. They would ride through the snow-covered meadow, watching the sun rise over the white peaks, breathing the crisp air, and Caroline thought she had never been so happy in her entire life. "You ever miss Boston?" Sterling asked one morning as they rode. "Not even a little bit," Caroline said honestly. "Everything I want is right here." Sterling smiled, that rare, transformative smile that still made Caroline's heart skip. "Everything I want is right here too." Spring came eventually, as it always does, the snow melting and the meadow turning green. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion, painting the landscape in purple and yellow and red. Sterling took Caroline higher into the mountains, showing her secret valleys and crystal lakes that few people had ever seen. It was in one of those high valleys, beside a lake so clear you could see the bottom 30 feet down, that Caroline told Sterling she was pregnant. They had dismounted to let the horses drink, and Caroline stood at the water's edge, gathering her courage. "Sterling, I have something to tell you." He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Caroline said, her voice trembling with equal parts joy and nervousness. "In the fall, I think." Sterling went very still. For a moment, Caroline worried that he was upset, that this was bringing back painful memories of Emma. Then he turned to her, and his face was full of wonder and joy and a little bit of fear. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes. Are you happy?" Sterling pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Happy does not even begin to describe it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Terrified, overjoyed, grateful beyond words. Caroline, you have given me a second chance at everything." "We will be careful," Caroline said. "I will ride to Denver before I get too far along. Stay with Mrs. Patterson for the birth. I know you are worried." "Of course I am worried," Sterling said, "but I also know you are strong, stronger than anyone I have ever met, and we will face this together." The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Sterling became even more protective, if that were possible, fussing over Caroline and making her rest when she wanted to work. As her belly began to swell with their child, he would place his large hands on it in wonder, feeling the baby kick and move. "Strong like his mother," Sterling would say. "Or her mother," Caroline would reply with a smile. In September, they made the journey to Denver. Caroline's pregnancy was advancing, and they both agreed she should be near a doctor for the birth. Mrs. Patterson welcomed them with open arms, giving them a room at the hotel and promising to be there for the delivery. The baby came in late October, on a night when the first snow of the season was falling. The labor was long and difficult, and Sterling paced outside the room like a caged animal, his face pale with fear. But when the baby's cry finally split the air, he burst through the door to find Caroline exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. "It is a boy," she said, her voice weak but triumphant. "A healthy, perfect boy." Sterling approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. Caroline pulled back the blanket to reveal their son, a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue-gray eyes. "He is beautiful," Sterling whispered, his eyes bright with tears. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Caroline asked. Sterling was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thomas, after your uncle. He brought you to the mountains, and the mountains brought you to me." "Thomas Cross," Caroline said, trying it out. "I like it. Tommy for short." Sterling sat on the edge of the bed, and Caroline placed their son in his arms. Watching her huge, powerful husband hold their tiny baby with such infinite gentleness made Caroline's heart swell, until she thought it might burst. "Hello, Tommy," Sterling said softly. "I am your papa, and I promise I will always protect you and your mama, and we will have a good life together. You will grow up in the mountains, learning to ride and hunt and fish. You will be brave and kind and strong. And you will always, always know you are loved." Tommy yawned, his tiny fist waving in the air, and Sterling laughed, a sound of pure joy. They stayed in Denver through the winter, giving Caroline time to recover, and Tommy time to grow stronger before making the journey back to the cabin. When spring came, they loaded their supplies and made the ride home, Tommy swaddled in a carrier on Caroline's back. He was a good baby, rarely fussing, and seemed to love the mountains as much as his parents did. Life settled into a new rhythm. Caroline managed the cabin and garden while also caring for Tommy, and Sterling continued his trapping and hunting. But everything was different now, richer and fuller. Their cabin rang with Tommy's laughter and babbling, and watching Sterling play with their son, building him toy horses from wood, and teaching him to recognize bird calls, filled Caroline with a contentment she had never imagined possible. And every dawn, they still rode together. Sterling had fashioned a smaller saddle for Tommy, and even as a toddler, he would ride in front of his father, shrieking with delight as thunder cantered across the meadow. Caroline would ride beside them on Copper, and together the three of them would watch the sun rise over the mountains they called home. 2 years after Tommy's birth, Caroline gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emma, after Sterling's first daughter, and this time there were no shadows in Sterling's eyes when he held her, just pure love. "Sarah would have liked you," Sterling told Caroline one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, watching Tommy chase butterflies while baby Emma slept in her mother's arms. "She would have liked that I found happiness again." "I am sure she would," Caroline said, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. "Sometimes I think she sent you to me," Sterling said, "some kind of blessing from beyond, because I do not know how else to explain the miracle of finding you." "I think we found each other," Caroline said. Two people who were lost, finding their way home. Sterling kissed the top of her head. "Home," he repeated. "That is exactly what this is." The years passed, marked by the turning of seasons and the growth of their children. Tommy grew tall and strong like his father, taking to the mountains like he had been born to them. He learned to track and hunt, to read the weather and handle horses with skill. Emma was more like Caroline, curious and determined, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. They added a third child, another boy they named Matthew, and then a fourth, a girl they called Rose. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, Sterling adding on rooms with the same careful craftsmanship Tom Vance had used on the original structure. Sterling's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Caroline found a few gray strands in her own hair. But they were happy, deeply and completely happy. The mountains that had once seemed so frightening and hostile had become their sanctuary, their joy, their life. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Sterling and Caroline rode out together at dawn, just the two of them. The children were old enough now to manage on their own for a few hours. They rode to that same high valley where Caroline had told Sterling she was pregnant with Tommy, to the clear lake that reflected the peaks like a mirror. They dismounted and sat by the water's edge, Sterling's arm around Caroline's shoulders. "You ever regret it?" Sterling asked. "Giving up the life you could have had in Boston?" Caroline looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single second. Why would I?" "Just wanted to make sure," Sterling said with a smile, "because I wake up some mornings and cannot believe this is my life. Cannot believe I get to love you, get to raise our children in these mountains, get to grow old with you." "Believe it," Caroline said, reaching up to touch his face. The beard was grayer now, his face more lined, but his eyes were the same, that pale blue-gray that had captivated her from the first moment. "We built this life together, and I would not change a single thing about it. Not even the part where you had never ridden a horse before you met me." Sterling teased. Caroline laughed. "Especially not that part. If I had known how to ride, I never would have needed you to teach me. And then where would we be?" "Fair point," Sterling said. He pulled her closer and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, listening to the wind whisper through the pines. "We should probably get back," Caroline said eventually. "The children will wonder where we are." "Just a few more minutes," Sterling said. "I want to remember this moment. You and me in the mountains where it all began." So they sat a little longer, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and laughter in the wilderness. Behind them, the horses grazed peacefully, and ahead of them, the mountains stood eternal, bearing witness to their story. When they finally rode back to the cabin, they found the children had prepared a surprise celebration, complete with Emma's attempt at a cake and wildflowers Tommy had picked. They spent the evening together as a family, telling stories and laughing, and Caroline looked around at the faces she loved most in the world and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. That night, after the children were asleep, Sterling and Caroline sat on their porch, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. "I love you," Sterling said, the words he had spoken 1,000 times but never tired of saying. "I love you too," Caroline replied, the answer she had given 1,000 times and meant more with each repetition. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and the mountains stood silent and strong. And in their cabin, surrounded by the family they had created, Sterling and Caroline Cross lived the rest of their days in the kind of happiness that only comes from facing fear and choosing love anyway. Years later, when Tommy was a man grown with children of his own, he would tell the story of his parents to his sons and daughters. He would tell them about the brave city woman who came west with nothing but determination, and the lonely mountain man who taught her to ride. He would tell them how they fell in love in the high country, how they built a life together through hard work and devotion, how they rode together every dawn for more than 50 years. And when his children asked if the story was true, Tommy would smile and say yes, every word of it. Because some love stories are not fairy tales but real, hard-won triumphs of the human heart. And his parents' love story was one for the ages. Sterling Cross died in his sleep at the age of 82, with Caroline beside him, holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for teaching me to live again." Caroline followed him just 6 months later, unable or unwilling to face the mountains without her partner. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their meadow where they had ridden together so many dawns. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in the mountains, carrying on the legacy of strength and love that Sterling and Caroline had built. The cabin stood for generations, a testament to the power of two people choosing each other, choosing courage, choosing life. And sometimes, on clear mornings when the sun is just rising, the descendants of Tommy and Emma and Matthew and Rose swear they can see two figures on horseback, riding across the meadow in the dawn light. A woman on a chestnut mare, a man on a bay horse, riding together as they always had, as they always would through eternity. Because some loves transcend even death, and some partnerships are forged so strong that not even the grave can break them. Sterling and Caroline Cross had that kind of love. The kind that changes you, that saves you, that makes you believe in miracles. And it all started with a city woman who had never ridden a horse, and a mountain man brave enough to teach her, and the dawn rides that bound their hearts together forever. The mountains remember their story still, whispering it to those who will listen. A tale of love found in the wilderness, of two broken people made whole by each other, of the courage it takes to risk your heart again after loss. It is a story as old as the peaks themselves and as fresh as the morning light. And somewhere in those mountains, in a meadow where wildflowers bloom each spring and the aspens turn gold each fall, the spirit of that love lives on, riding into the dawn, always and forever.